Hi, good evening. Jody here from Healing Journey. And tonight I wanted to talk to you about something that I hear all the time, which is I have gut issues and I've been to the doctor, but my doctor says my gut is fine. This is something that I actually heard from my doctor quite a bit. I went multiple times to GI specialists and my family doctor, and they ran the full gamut of tests. I have done a zillion stool tests. I'm probably a stool test expert. And all the tests that I did with conventional medicine came back fine. And I knew that that was not the case because my gut wasn't fine and I knew that there was a reason. And so I encourage you, before we go any further this evening, if you have gut symptoms, to really listen to your gut instincts. There's a reason. The body does not make mistakes, and so our symptoms are often a way of our body telling us that something's not right, and we need to dig deeper to find out what it is. The problem is that conventional medicine doctors aren't necessarily specialized in dealing with preventative kinds of things, and they're not specialized in the gut. Conventional medicine is really, really good at surgeries, and they're really good at disease care. And so when you go to the doctor and they tell you, hey, your gut's fine, you don't need to worry about it, it's just IBS, what they're saying is, congratulations, you do not have a disease. And this is actually really good news because it means that things have not broken down to the point where your body has gotten to that disease stage. Remember, we have health here and we have disease here, and there is a gap in between. Doctors are really good with dealing with disease. Health is something that not a lot of people are at, especially at this day and age when we have tons of heavy metals. We're eating really crappy foods that our bodies are not able to tolerate naturally. And so not a lot of people are at health stage. We're usually somewhere in between. And so when you have gut issues, your body is saying, hey, something's not right. And that's a chance for you to look into what that is. So tonight I wanted to go over some of the main reasons that you might have gut issues, but you have not got a disease. So the first reason is food intolerances. So gluten is the big one. I've done a couple of lives on gluten, but I'm just going to briefly talk about it here. With food intolerances, the big issue is that you're eating foods that your body can't tolerate. It's going to cause or contribute to leaky gut. It's going to cause inflammation throughout your body. If your gut is irritated, is it going to heal? Absolutely not. If your gut is irritated, are you maybe going to have bloating? Are you going to have poor digestion? Likely. If you have leaky gut, is the microvilli, which is the little finger-like structures on the lining of your wall, going to be able to produce the enzymes that you need to break down your food? Probably not. So oftentimes with people, when they eliminate foods, when they eat healthy, when they cut out things like dairy and gluten, then their gut starts to heal. Those are the lucky people. Those are people where maybe only one or two things is standing in their way to healing. Something that I like to tell people is that the body wants to heal and we just have to clear the way. And for some people choosing to eliminate gluten or dairy, so I recommend doing this, top allergen foods, soy, corn, peanut butter, things like that for 30 days and then start to reintroduce. And if you feel better at the end of the 30 days, then you know it is food related. If not, let's dig a little deeper. Another common thing, worms. No one talks about worms anymore. We used to do worm cleanses and then magically like 50, 60 years ago, we just stopped because worms don't exist. They exist. I've tested clients and there are worms in their stool living in their bodies and they didn't necessarily know. One of my clients had no gut symptoms, 0 gut symptoms, and guess what? She had worms. So worms are a big thing. And the reason why I put that at the top is because they're the thing that you want to deal with first, not only because they're really large and living inside of you and probably consuming all of your nutrients, but also because bacterial infections can actually live inside the worms or H. pylori. So you need to kill the big guns first. The other problem is you've gone to your doctor, you've done a stool sample. Why didn't it show up, Jody, in my stool sample? It didn't show up in your stool sample because you need to have the worm lay eggs in the stool sample in order for it to show up. Now, the testing I use is DNA technology testing, and it is 10,000 times, about 10,000 times more stronger, more reliable than traditional stool culture testing. And so you're much more likely to see worms show up there in the test that I run versus the one in your doctor runs. Or you can do the old school test where you tape a piece of tape to your butt and then look in the morning to see if there's eggs, but that is not always very reliable. Next thing you might see are, and I'm probably going to not spell this very well, amoebas. So amoebas are lovely parasites that live inside of your body. There are lots of different kinds. They can cause lots of different issues, and sometimes they show up in conventional testing and sometimes they don't. Conventional testing in Canada, for example, in Ontario, is just starting to move to DNA testing, but they still will look under a microscope, which means if they don't see the amoeba in the microscope, they will tell you don't have one. But that doesn't necessarily mean you don't have one. It just means they didn't see it in your microscopic tiny little sample that they saw. So for example, I had an amoeba. It was called Blastocystis hominis, and it didn't show up in multiple tests. It was responsible for a significant portion of my symptoms. So it's going to the washroom about 7 times a day. And it only showed up, this was before the DNA test was out, so it only showed up in the stool culture when I was so ill that it was probably massively reproducing all over my guts. So it was pretty obvious for it to show up then. But when I was managing, the Blastocystis hominis was not showing up on my stool tests at all. Next thing we want to look at is bacterial infections. Oops. Can you see that? How do I get that? There we go. Bacterial infections are another really big thing for your gut. So often these can come in a couple of forms. It can be bacterial overgrowth, can be Campylobacter, for example, which is traveler's diarrhea. So I've had that. It showed up on a cruise and had me quarantined. They can be quite annoying to get rid of, but usually, not to get rid of, they can just be quite annoying to live with. But they can be very easily treated with antimicrobials. But they're the last thing we treat, again, because they can live inside of your worms. We also have something called SIBO. I've gone over this a few times before, but for those of you that haven't caught it, SIBO means small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So when we're eating fermented foods, what's that doing? That's growing our good flora in our intestine, and it's allowing the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth in our small intestine to overgrow. So essentially what happens is this good bacteria migrates up into the small intestine and has a bit of a party there. And this is actually what causes the classic IBS symptoms. So those of you that have diarrhea only, potentially there can be a type of bacterial overgrowth that will cause this. Those that have constipation only, yep, that's still SIBO. And those that have both, so if you have that mix between constipation and diarrhea, the methane and hydrogen gases are being produced by the bacteria, so they're switching off, and that is creating the SIBO for you. So small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is usually treated last. Why? Because it's somewhat functional. So if you have dysbiosis in other parts of your gut, the SIBO is going to exist. And so you need to deal with, this is really shaky tonight, you need to deal with the SIBO at the very end because it's a bit functional. And so when you've gotten rid of the parasites, when you've gotten rid of everything else, then you can actually clear SIBO and it should go away. If it doesn't go away, what might you have? This one is fairly new. It's kind of hot off the press. Lyme and Co. So Lyme and co-infections, they're finding, because Lyme likes to live in the central nervous system and the gut has a nervous system called the enteric nervous system. Guess what? Lyme lives in the gut. And so they're starting to connect chronic IBS with Lyme disease and co-infection. So that's actually what I realized I had. So I have a Lyme co-infection called Borrelia miyamotoi. I'm not going to say it right. It might be Miyamotoi borrelia. Get it confused. But basically, it's living in the enteric nervous system in my gut and really affecting my body's ability to digest. So those are some of the things that might be underlying your gut infections. I want to talk the next time about heavy metals, because part of the reason that our gut is so inviting to these lovely creatures is because we are so toxic at this day and age. We have tons of heavy metals, and these gut bugs are feeding off of the heavy metals. And so I think it's important that when we look at gut bugs, we're also looking at heavy metals as well. That is it for this evening. If you have any questions or want to know more about how to run a gut test for these things and discover and finally get answers to what's really going on in your gut so we can make a solid treatment plan, just message me. Have a lovely evening.